You're listening to Panthers on Tap. I'm Curtis Rauen, joined by Bryson Karbley. We're just two fans sharing our love for the game and Carolina Panthers football. So join us, crack open a cold one, some bubbly, a little wine, some scotch. We don't care, whatever makes you sleep better at night. Before we dive into the episode, a little self-promotion. Stop what you're doing. Go give us a follow on Twitter at Panthers on Tap. Join the discussion on our Facebook group. We have over 2,500 members. You can listen to us wherever you get your podcast. Just search Panthers on Tap. The coaching search is ramping up. Interviews have already taken place for some of the Carolina Panthers candidates. As you guys can see, we are both now wearing the Unreal hoodies. I'll tell you what, Bryson, they fit the company. They're unreal. I'm not going to try to sell a product to someone if it's shit. And this is like one of the best sweatshirts I've ever worn. It's so comfortable. It's got some like cool patches on it that are stitched in. The lettering's all stitched, and it's got like you mentioned when you kind of highlighted this, but almost like a turtleneck almost feeling up in here. Not tight though. It's not too tight, but it's light and comfortable, dude. It's great. Yeah. I love it.
It's hard to take off, man. I think I've worn this like 3 episodes straight. It's just so comfortable. Like I don't really want to put on anything else, and it's just perfect because it's Carolina Panthers. So, yeah, I mean, we're not lying or saying it for money. They're not paying us. It's just legitimately the best hoodie I've ever owned. So.
And I just checked before we got on here. They are sold out for Panthers right now. But I would just monitor their website. It's Unreal, UNRL.com, and just keep an eye on that. But these hoodies they're great. They're as advertised. I think they're running like $100 and some bucks, 108, something like that. So go check them out, and we just appreciate them for sending us some goods on that. But let's get into the coaching search here. Panthers have completed interviews now with 7 coaching candidates so far. I'll run down the list here very quickly. So Todd Monken, Mike McDonald, Chris Tabor, Ajero Evero, Frank Smith, and then today, most recently, Raheem Morris, and then Dan Quinn. So 7 total so far. Bryson, we went extensively into things last week with the crew, but let's focus on these 7 candidates for a second. Of this list, who jumps out to you? Who's intriguing out of those 7 guys?
Yeah, I think I'd like to start with Mike McDonald. I think a lot of us talked about him last week. The defensive coordinator in Baltimore who has really, made a name for himself in college and then also in the NFL, coming from one Harbaugh to another. So, of course, you have that aspect that he's coming from a Harbaugh system, a Harbaugh coaching tree, a family that's proven to win. His dad won a Super Bowl, John's won a Super Bowl, and Jim's won a college championship. So a family, a blue blood of football coming from that lineage, I think is impressive. And then, of course, all year we've seen the Ravens defense again and again play at a very high level. Versus Ben Johnson, held the Lions to a very low total. I can't remember exactly how low it was, but it was a very impressive showing versus, the hottest name in the coaching candidacy this cycle in Ben Johnson. So Mike McDonald is really impressive in my opinion. And then on the other side of that, of that team, the offensive coordinator, I'm really high on. I think I'm higher than most. Todd Monken, coming from Georgia, then making the jump to the NFL. I think he's been with the Ravens for 2 years now. He has a history of working with smaller quarterbacks. He did at Georgia with Stetson Bennett. Got him obviously successful. One of the best college quarterbacks during his time in college football, and then making the jump to the NFL and transforming that Ravens offense into what it is now. The Ravens are probably the best team in the NFL at this point, and they have been all year. I think if you can draw from either of those candidates there in Baltimore, I think would be a successful hiring cycle for the Carolina Panthers.
Yeah, Monken, while you talked about him, he's interesting to me. He's not someone you'd probably put on the Panthers' radar just based off of what David Tepper has said. He wants a young, offensive-minded head coach.
Yeah.
But he definitely has experience, and I do what I can to try to read the tea leaves of some of these beat reporters, the local ones here. Mike Kay has brought him up several times. Darren Gant has name dropped him specifically in the Ask the Old Guy mailbag that he's done, which I thought was interesting recently. So he is something that, I'm kind of keeping on the back burner. I feel like, okay, if one of these younger guys don't pan out, this could be a possibility. My only reservation with him is, has he turned around an offense that is not that great and doesn't have a lot of talent around it? And that's what Carolina's at. Georgia had top prospects both years he was there. He comes to Baltimore. They got some pieces this offseason. Plus, they have one of the greatest quarterbacks in the NFL right now with Lamar Jackson. But they added OBJ. They got Zay Flowers. They got Mark Andrews. So, they have solidified pieces. I don't know if we've really seen what he can do when he doesn't have that kind of roster. So that's my only reservation with him. Mike Macdonald, that you can't discount what he's done. You mentioned the Ben Johnson game. They also limited the 49ers. They beat them this year. Yeah, they held the Lions to 6 points. It's impressive.
Yeah.
Just trying to look at some of the other games. Yeah, they beat the 49ers recently in December. And then obviously we know the Dolphins, they held McDaniels, his offense with 2-1 in the end of December. So yeah, he's got a track record. So he kind of intrigues me. I also really think Frank Smith is someone who has come up, seeing his reaction to when the Panthers were interested in him a couple of weeks ago and he got choked up. He's someone that's intriguing. I know that he really doesn't call the plays in Miami. He is the OC there, but he's got, familiarity with the quote unquote Shanahan's offense. He's got experience with the Sean Payton offense. So he's coming from several different coaching trees, which is intriguing to me for Bryce Young. And then he's also comfortable with really a quarterback that struggled early on too in Tua. Tua struggled, and then McDaniels came in with his staff, and Frank Smith was a part of that. And, we've seen Tua this year, he really took off. So that one's really intriguing to me, and I think he's kind of a sleeper too. What's your thoughts on Raheem Morris? I know a lot of folks have brought him up lately. Edgar comes to mind. We've had him on this show. He seems to be pretty high on him. But just your thoughts on Morris and, his time in LA.
Yeah, he's won a Super Bowl as a defensive coordinator. I think what's interesting about Raheem Morris is he's coached both sides of the ball. He's coached offense and defense. And everywhere he's been, I know he was a head coach in Tampa that wasn't super successful, but everywhere he's been, everybody has rave reviews about him. Players like Jalen Ramsey, who's on the Dolphins, everybody saw that tweet about Raheem Morris saying that Jalen Ramsey would play for Raheem Morris in a heartbeat, that he's that kind of guy. He still talks to him every week. I think when I think of a leader of men, I think Raheem Morris is probably at the top of that list out of these candidates. I think he commands a locker room. I think he is somebody that players can get behind. And I think he's a person that genuinely cares about his players. And it's more than just a job for him, and it's more than just football. And I think that when you have somebody like that, similar to what Steve Wilkes did in Carolina, I think that that's something that players can get behind and really play for. And when it comes down to it, X's and O's are important, but I think the relationship aspect of being a head coach and leading these other grown men to play a child's game, I think is almost as important as being, the X and O guy like a Ben Johnson or a Frank Smith. So I think if Carolina did end up hiring Raheem Morris, I think they could do a lot worse than him in Carolina. So I would not be mad at that hire at all. Edgar's turned me on a lot to the Raheem Morris hype. So shout out to him. I wasn't as high on him in the beginning, but looking at some of the stuff that he's posted, Edgar's posted about Raheem Morris, and then watching the interview that I think it was the president of the Rams talking about Raheem Morris and the relationship that he has with him and the respect that he has in stating that he thinks Raheem Morris absolutely deserves a head coaching job and that he will be a head coach and that he's going to be a good head coach his second go around, I think is intriguing. Yeah, I think Raheem Morris would also be a good hire. I don't really know of a lot of bad hires in this cycle that they've interviewed with. I think we had talked about it briefly, like just one-on-one, me and you outside of the podcast, and I think the only name that came up that we were like, okay, if they hire him, we'll be upset, was like Kellen Moore, and they haven't even requested to interview Kellen Moore. So a lot of these guys they're interviewing, I think all of them bring different aspects to the position of head coach in Carolina that bring pros and cons. Monken's age, but I think specifically just to touch on Monken real quick, I think with him, when you turn on the tape, Josh Norris did a great breakdown of Monken's offense. He does a lot of the same stuff that Ben Johnson does that these other hot offensive coordinators do. With the protections and the pass sets and drawing it up. He's just not young. I mean, that's the only difference, I think. And Tepper made the comment, I would love to have a guy around for 20 or 30 years. But, if Monken's the right guy and he's someone that you believe in, then he could be here for 10 to 15 years. I mean, Pete Carroll coached until he was fucking 75. So, I think it's really important just to get it right. And I don't think passing on someone because of the talent that they've had on offense or their age is really Carolina's in a position to do at this point. So making the right hires is definitely the most important. And I think what they're doing, interviewing everyone with this firm that's helping them, I think is the absolute best way to go about it. You get everyone in, you do your virtuals first, and then you cut it down to in-persons for your second round, and then you make a decision. And it sounds like they're moving pretty quickly through these interviews, kind of maybe cutting some names off the list as they go. And I'll be very interested to see who they bring in for in-person interviews for second interviews.
Yeah, Morris, I think a lot of what you said I kind of agree with. My only reservation with him is I've kind of been on this train. I don't know if I really want to retread this go around, but I think there's exceptions to that. Obviously, Jim Harbaugh, Mike Vrabel comes to mind. So there is some reservations there in just what he did with Tampa Bay. But again, he was kind of inherited that team because he was hired after John Gruden was fired. I believe he was the D coordinator, and he was just given the title, and then he took it for a couple of years. I think they went to the playoffs one year. They went 10-6, went down the second year. And then I think the third year is when he was let go there. But he has crazy amount of experience. And like you said, he's coached on both sides of the ball, and he's been, I think he's widely respected around the league. So again, I'm not going to discount anything he's done. I think, like you said, I think they could do worse. So if that is the direction they go in, so be it. But I wanted to ask you this, while we're kind of on this, and we'll kind of just shift a little bit here for a second, is if Carolina goes with a defensive coach, and I posted this on Twitter this week, and I wanted to get your take on it. If they go defensive, why not Ejiro Evero?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think for me specifically, I would go away from that. I wouldn't agree with hiring Ejiro Evero as the head coach, only because for me, in my opinion, this is just me, he's still got that stench of Frank Reich and that in that locker room with that head coach. I think getting someone new in here with a different leader that wasn't in this locker room, the year prior, where it was the most disappointing season in Carolina Panthers history, probably, I think would be good for the locker room to get a change of leadership. And it would be a change of leadership if Evero moves into the head coaching position from defensive coordinator. But how much, we don't know what goes on in the locker room. You know, how many players were going to Evero this past season and looking to him for leadership. And, you know, he was maybe filling in that role as a head coach, quote unquote, throughout the interimship of Chris Tabor. So I really think starting new, like we've talked about, from top to bottom, with a new GM and a new head coach is the way this team needs to go to get that stench of last season off. And if that new head coach decides to keep Evero as the defensive coordinator, which I think they should, because he did a very impressive job this past season, then that's their choice. But if they decide to move on, that's their choice as well, and I would understand. So I think hiring him as a head coach wouldn't be the worst thing. Obviously, I think that he definitely deserves a chance somewhere to be a head coach. I just don't know if it's in Carolina, just based off of last season and him being in that locker room for the whole year and what happened and what transpired in Carolina, unfortunately.
I want to preface my take on this is I don't think he would get it. But if they would pick a defensive coach, this would be my pick. I just think he has done a commendable job with this defense this year with all the injuries. At one point, I think everyone in the secondary got injured. And he's really brought the best out of Dante Jackson.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like J.C. Horn, when healthy, improved under him. I also think, I mean, there's no secret, Derek Brown had his best year this year. And I think there was some other guys that were out of place that I think would have benefited more if there wasn't injuries. CJ Henderson early on was playing decent. Troy Hill, I mean, they brought him in. That was one of Evero's guys. So I think he's done enough to garner interviews. And I want to say he got an interview with every team last year. Like, people respect him around the league. And anytime I've watched his press conferences, I don't think either of us have talked bad about him at all. Just the way he carries himself. And it kind of a little bit reminds me of the no bullshit Steve Wilkes type of approach, like total business, going to give you good answers. They're going to be short, but they're going to be concise, and they're going to be, what matter. And I think if I had to pick anyone defensively, that would be my guy. And I just think the familiarity with it, this team could take off and take the next step defensively too. So I just wanted to throw that by you because I know that's been talked about, and it kind of leads me into this next question. And me and Dave from PNP were going back and forth on Twitter. I think it was yesterday about this, but Mike K put this out today that Chris Tabor and Ejiro Evero are very well respected within the organization, have a very large shot of being retained. So I think that's kind of clear with how they've blocked interviews with other teams for lateral moves, meaning teams that want a special teams coordinator are reaching out to Tabor, and then teams that want a D coordinator are reaching out to Evero, and the Panthers have said, no, we're not doing that. They've obviously allowed them to do head coach interviews. What do you think of that? Are you a fan of them blocking the lateral move interviews?
Well, and then you see reports from like Josiah Anderson who says that there are coaches in the organization that feel like they're stuck and they can't interview for other positions. So that makes me wonder if it's guys like Chris Tabor and Ejiro Evero that want to make a different move and just want to start somewhere else, and they can't because they're getting blocked. So it makes me think, do they want to stick around in Carolina, which I wouldn't blame them if they didn't. Kind of the same what I was talking about, that stench of last season. But I think it's important to allow the head coach to come in, to have no pressure to keep anyone, and allow that head coach to make their own decisions about their own staff, and not be mandated by the owner on who they keep and who they don't keep. I think that's where a lot of our issues have come from, is from the very top, and David Tepper mandating different things throughout this organization. And we saw where that got us this season. So I think it's important for Tepper to take a hands-off approach for the first time in his life in anything he's ever done, and allow a football person to make football decisions. And that's probably why you don't see him interviewing guys like Bill Belichick and Jim Harbaugh in Carolina, because those guys aren't going to put up with that bullshit. And unfortunately, we're going to miss out on Jim Harbaugh, who, everyone knows I'm very high on, a true team builder, a winner everywhere he's been, would be perfect fit for Carolina. But, at this point, it doesn't look like he's going to get an interview in Carolina. So, unfortunately, he may end up in a division rival with the Falcons or somewhere like the Chargers. But I think it's important that Tepper does take that step back and take a hands-off approach. But it looks like he's not. I mean, just from this, them blocking, them interviewing other places. I don't know. I don't think that's, Dan Morgan doing it. I think that's David Tepper. And unfortunately, you get reports like what Josina tweeted out that people feel like they're stuck in Carolina and can't leave. So that's not really the culture that you want for a new coach to come into. And that may be a reason why we don't get one of the top, names in this free agency of coaching, which is one of the best in my memory of available coaches for hiring. So if that ultimately what leads to us not getting Ben Johnson, I mean, that's just so disappointing in a tenure of this owner that's been nothing but disappointment. And the Carolina has the worst record in the NFL ever since David Tepper's been the owner, I think for the past 5 or 6 years. And I think that's going to continue if he continues this hands-on approach where he thinks he knows what's right and what's wrong. And we'll just continue the losing that we've done. So I don't agree with blocking the interviews. I would agree with allowing, them to interview other places and see what happens, and just let the new coach come in and make decisions that he wishes.
This is where we disagree. I think I am all for blocking the interviews, and I think this is the approach they're taking. We'll see how it pans out here whenever they hire the coach. But my assumption is they are keeping these coaches to give the next head coach the option to retain these guys, because it's no secret Tabor is a highly sought after special teams coach. I mean, you saw the NFLPA survey. He was the top 5 among players, and he's been highly respected around the league and has been doing this for years for special teams. And then obviously we've already talked about Evero, so we know where he's at. Teams do this all the time. It's happened before that teams have blocked coaches from doing lateral moves. I don't blame them. And it's tough shit for the coaches, and it sucks. But frankly, I don't really care. Like, if these are the best coaches and the next head coach wants them, cool. If the next head coach doesn't want these guys, then you know what? They go off. And Denver did this last year with Evero. Evero stuck around, and then once they hired Sean Payton made the decision, okay, you can go out and interview other places, and that's why he ended up here in Carolina. So this has been done time and time again. It's unfortunate for those guys because they are stuck at this point, but they're really good coaches. Why I don't see why Tepper would get rid of them if this next head coach coming in wants them. And if they don't want them, then they go interview and find somewhere else, and that's totally fine. But what I do agree with you with is Tepper should not make the decision already that these are the guys. And I don't think he's doing that, because I think he's learned from what he did last year with Frank Reich, hopefully, of forcing these coaches and this all-star staff. But I do think it's beneficial to keep these guys around and give this next head coach, presumably a young offensive coordinator, the opportunity to keep these guys if they want to. And I think when I was talking to Dave about this on Twitter, the Colts did it last year with Gus Bradley. They kept him around. Shane Steichen came in. He wanted Gus Bradley and kept him. And, the Colts ended up being all right. But I think you got to let the head coach decide that, though, when they come in. Like, give them the option. This isn't like, okay, this is who they are, and we're keeping Tabor and all that, like this whole – so – I'm hoping Tepper is that way. And I think that's kind of the approach they're taking. So we shall see what happens here probably in the next week or two.
Yeah, I mean, my worry is just that it's going to be mandated that the new coach come in and keep these coaches. I mean, that's my worry. But I do like the aspect that, if your point that he's going to give them the chance and the opportunity to keep them if they want. But my worry is knowing David Tepper, that this is who David Tepper wants, and he's going to push that they stay. No matter
it's
what.
justified too, because he did it last year. This is why we're here, because he tried to force a coaching staff that just had way too many chefs and too many ideas, and it was just a mess. Good idea, but it just didn't work out. So no, I agree. But yeah, that's kind of where we're at with those coaches. But it's clear that they clearly value those two guys. We'll see where this thing heads here in the next couple of weeks. Let's talk about some of the other couple coaches that have not interviewed yet. They're on scheduled to interview, because those are coming up here. So tomorrow, which is Thursday when this episode drops, it sounds like Brian Callahan will be interviewing. And then Dave, is it Canales?
I think
Canales?
so.
Canales. He's also interviewing tomorrow. And then we have Ben Johnson on Friday, the biggest interview of Tepper's life. I know it's pretty damn slim. I'm still holding out this sliver of hope right now. But the only one not scheduled yet is Bobby Slowick, and he talked about it today. He's been focused. I'm wondering maybe if he slides into Friday, but I believe they play Saturday. So they do play Saturday. So I'm like, I don't know, Friday. He might be interviewing next week. We'll see. But just of those, Callahan, Johnson, and Canales, or whatever, however you pronounce the guy's name. What intrigues you about those guys? Anything?
Yeah, I'm not as high on Callahan as a lot of people are. He's been a good offensive coordinator, but he's had Joe Burrow, he's had T. Higgins, he's had Jamar Chase, and I'm just not as high on him as I am the other candidates. I don't think he would be a bad hire, but maybe if you come with the approach that he could potentially lure T. Higgins to Carolina, then maybe that's something.
I love that.
Yeah, maybe that's something that gives him an extra draw to you. But I prefer some of these other guys over Callahan. I prefer Canales over Callahan. His work that he's done throughout his career with Geno Smith and Russell Wilson and Baker Mayfield. His resume is impressive. Baker has had a resurgence under his offense there in Tampa. So I like him a lot. I think he's only got one interview request, and that's from Carolina, which is strange. But yeah, I think that he has a lot of upside. And then obviously Ben Johnson, who is both of our number one choices. His resume speaks for itself. The Lions offense, one of the most dangerous in the league, for his tutelage in Detroit. He's learned under Dan Campbell, the rah-rah leader of men style. And I think that Ben Johnson is the number one hire for a lot of teams, including Washington, just north of us. I think if Tepper can get him to Carolina, I think it's going to be because he offers him a lot of money that other teams aren't willing to match, and it's because Ben Johnson wants to return home to Carolina and bring his home team back to prominence. And I'm hoping that has some pull for him, because we need him in Carolina. I think that Bryce Young would take off under that Ben Johnson style offense that he runs. And a lot of these players that we have on the roster currently, I feel like Tommy Tremble would take a step forward. I feel like Jonathan Mingo would take a step forward. It's hard not to in that offense because of his scheme and what he does with the offensive line and protections and scheming wide receivers open. It's just spectacular what he does. And Ben Johnson, like you said, it is the biggest interview of David Tepper's life, and he needs to do whatever he can do to get him to Carolina. But they're going to have a lot of competition, and I don't have a lot of hope that Carolina is his number one choice, or maybe not even his number two choice. But maybe he really likes Bryce Young and sees what Bryce Young and Jared Goff can be the same quarterback. I think Bryce Young has the ability to do what Jared Goff did this year. In that Lions offense. I think that he's that kind of quarterback. So maybe that lures him a little bit more to Carolina than anywhere else. But I don't know. Obviously Ben Johnson is my number one, but I'm very intrigued by Dave Canales and his work that he's done throughout his career with quarterbacks, and then obviously seeing Baker. Shout out to Baker, man. I've said it before. I'm a huge Baker fan still to this day because of what he's done, what he did in Carolina as a teammate for the guys here, and then everything that you've heard about him as a teammate. There were some misconceptions about him in Cleveland, I think, but the guys in Tampa, I listened to Dan Campbell tell a story today about Baker, how he was throwing for his tight ends that were getting scouted in, like, he threw for like 5 guys, and then he had his own throwing session after to like that's the kind of dude that Baker is, and I'll always pull for him, even though it's a division rival. Obviously, when he's playing against my team, I'm not going to be pulling for him, but I love seeing Baker doing what he's doing, and I fully support him throughout the playoffs. But yeah, I mean, Dave has done a great job with him, and getting his career back on track, and I think that he could do the same thing for Bryce in Carolina, just based off his record with all the quarterbacks he's worked with throughout his career.
Yeah, Edgar really put me on to Dave. Just some of the stuff he's posted recently on Twitter and what he's done with Geno as his QB coach and passing game coordinator. And then obviously we saw what Baker's resurgence. He had, comes from Cleveland, got injured, had a pretty good year in Cleveland, got injured, then goes to Carolina. That was a total disaster. Went to LA for a couple of games, and then we all know what he did this year. So you can't turn away from that. So he's intriguing to me a little bit. Brian Callahan, I had similar reservations like you did. He doesn't call plays in Cincinnati. But there was a video that just got put out an hour ago from Zach Taylor, Bengals coach, talking about Callahan. And he basically said that Callahan coordinates everything they do offensively. He establishes the whole structure on game day, and he's developed every position they have. So it sounds like he is very heavily involved, and I don't discount that at all. So that kind of raises some eyebrows for me. So I'm not totally, thrown out on the idea. And then Ben Johnson, I mean, that's wholeheartedly the number one. I mean, there's no doubt about it. Watch that game, that playoff game. And I know they got slowed down in the second half by Morris, but what he does schematically it's outstanding. It's fun. It's so fun to watch. It really is. And I'm holding out hope that Bryce Young sells him, or he is sold on Bryce Young, because I think that is the only hope for him coming here. I really do. I think Tom Pelissero a couple months ago, and I don't know if I can find it now, but he said that money is not going to be Ben Johnson's top priority. So that is, I mean, clearly the writing on the wall that Washington is probably going to get him, which is crazy to think of how much of a shit show that team has been. I can't believe Carolina might lose out to Washington. Like, it's crazy to me, but that's where we're at. David Tepper has built this home, and we got to fucking lay in it.
Yeah, I mean, but they have new ownership in Washington. They have the top GM candidate for the past 5 years.
Times are changing.
And
sure.
They have an owner that is respected, and it seems like he's going to be a hands-off owner, a decent owner in Washington now. So they're definitely on the rise, and I think that they have a Tar Heel quarterback in Sam Howell. They're going to have an option to draft a Tar Heel quarterback in Drake May, possibly at number 2 in the draft. And with Ben Johnson being a former Tar Heel quarterback, there's a lot of dots that you can connect there. With the change in everything that's going on, and the possibility for him to work with Drake May, who I think is going to be an outstanding quarterback in the NFL. That's hard to look away from and it not raise your eyebrows like, okay, this might be Ben Johnson's top choice.
All right, let's talk. We kind of talked about it, but I just wanted to mention this while we were on the conversation. Dan Graziano with ESPN, he did a prediction today on all the openings. And he predicted Brian Callahan to be the next Panthers head coach. He didn't give a whole lot of reason. I think Ricky put it best. It was more of a dart throw. just based off. And I read all the other opinions he had about all the other teams, and it sounded like he had a lot more intel on where those teams were headed than in Carolina. So again, I wouldn't put too much stock in this, but I just wanted to mention it. And he did, in his reasoning, mention the willingness to work with an impatient owner in David Tepper. So just something to monitor. I wanted to throw it up while we're talking about it. Let's talk about this last thing here with Adam Kaplan. He put this out, I think it was Sunday, if I have this right, January 15th, which was it was Monday. So he Pro Football Network, which he works for, put out the Panthers have interest in Eagles OC Brian Johnson and assistant GM Alec Hallaby for their head coach and GM vacancies. They've already interviewed Hallaby. A source told Kaplan that owner David Tepper is very impressed and enamored with how the Eagles run their operation. We all know what transpired this week or on Monday with the game. Eagles have been on just a downward spiral. I think they've lost like 6 or 7. Things do not look right in Philly right now. I mean, that's clear. We'll talk about that, and then I'll mention something about Diana Rossini's report that literally came out like a half hour ago. But thoughts on Brian Johnson and Hallaby as the next tandem in Carolina?
Yeah, so at the start of the show where I mentioned the bad hires in the cycle, I mentioned that we can only think of Kellen Moore. Brian Johnson would be a bad hire. I think the regression that the Eagles have shown on both sides of the ball, offense and defense this season, and one of the greatest collapses in recent memory of a team that started 10-1 and then lost 6 of 7 and then gets blown out by a Tampa Bay Buccaneers team that put up 9 points versus the Carolina Panthers the week prior. And I think that Brian Johnson is still, getting his footing as an offensive coordinator. I think there were a lot of issues with the Eagles. Jalen Hurts was battling some injuries. Of course, A.J. Brown was out for that game. But even prior to that, they obviously had some issues on offense and more specifically defense probably. I think their defense was probably their Achilles heel. But the offense didn't look good in that game versus the Bucs. And that Bucs defense isn't a world beater. And Hurts struggled big time. And I think that ultimately you got to look at the change in coordinator there. So Steichen goes to the Colts, and he is, a coach of the year candidate with Indianapolis with a backup quarterback and, them almost making the playoffs year one with Steichen. And then you see the fall off from him leaving Philadelphia and them going to Brian Johnson and the struggles they've had this year. So I'm good on Brian Johnson. I think that he will eventually be a head coach. I do think that because I think he's got some qualities that are redeeming about himself. But I think right now he's still trying to find his footing as a coordinator, and promoting him to head coach, I just don't think is the correct way going about it. But then again, you have to think to yourself, how many people are going to be willing to work with David Tepper? And maybe it's someone like this that is currently in a bad situation but can rise above it if he's in a better situation with him calling the shots and not Nick Sirianni maybe. But I think that hiring Brian Johnson would be a mistake. I really do, and I think he just needs a couple more years under his belt as a coordinator and figure things out and then go on from there.
Yeah, it's really hard to overlook that Monday game. It is. Yeah. It's tough. Reminded me a lot of Frank Reich. I mean, that he's coming from that Frank Reich system. I mean, it was a screen every other play. They refuse to run the ball, even if it. I mean, you gotta even if it ain't working, you gotta at least run the rock to set up other things. And they refuse to run Swift. I mean, they were not running it, and that reminded me so much of Frank Reich early on when the run game wasn't working. I mean, they had like 4 runs, the Eagles, like for most of the game. It was ridiculous. Like there was they did nothing to supplement or try to counteract the defense in Tampa Bay and Todd Bowles. I mean, they were blitzing like crazy and they were doing nothing. I mean, it was
Yeah.
it was great. It reminded me of watching Carolina. I mean, seriously, it was just like, holy shit. So I would be shocked. I mean, I shouldn't say I would be shocked because it's David Tepper, but like, why pick an apple from the tree when you already got rid of the tree last? Like, it's
Yeah.
just that one doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Now, saying all that, I've seen reports out there, and I put this out on our account, is Brian Johnson and Sirianni have not seen eye to eye, and that's been reported. And I think it was either The Athletic or ESPN, and I can't remember, so don't quote me on this source of it, but it was one of those. And the reporter had said that, there were times, and they pointed to a game, and I can't remember exactly which game it was, but Brian Johnson wanted to throw it on fourth down, and Sirianni said, no, we're running it, and it got stuffed. So there has been some kind of back and forth and disagreement on play calling, and I don't know how much of influence Sirianni. It sounds like he's probably got the final say on what's going to be called. So that kind of gives me a little bit of hope, like a sliver, but it's so hard to get rid of that Monday game because they played so bad. But I did want to mention this because Albert Breer put this out, which I thought was interesting reading it. And he was talking about, he said he's heard a lot of folks pushing back, and this kind of goes with Brian Johnson, pushing back on Cowboys D coordinator Dan Quinn as a head coach candidate after the Sunday collapse against the Packers. And he said that a lot of people overreact to these things. Sean McVay was hired from a Washington team that missed the playoffs in 2016. And Matt LaFleur was taken from a 9-7 Titans team from which he ran the offense, and the offense was middle of the pack. So, like, sometimes I think people, what he's kind of get at is people overreact to some of this final game of the year. But it's so hard to discount. And I posted this in December, not even thinking this guy was a candidate. Brian Johnson, fire Brian Johnson, was trending on Twitter in December. And I've said it before. I think I said it last week. The streets don't lie. When fans are saying there's a bad coach and it's like over a season and it's not just like one time, because fans are overreactive. We get that. I understand that. But when it happens time and time again, most of the time, it's pretty damn true. Like,
Yeah.
as much as people don't want it, like, that's just the reality of it. So I don't know. I'm not going to discount anyone. If they make it, we'll see what happens. But wanted to discuss it because I thought, this is really the first time we've seen a candidate outside Ben Johnson that have been tied to having interest from David Tepper and the Panthers. So I think it's noteworthy. But piggybacking off all this discussion about the Eagles, Diana Rossini tweeted tonight that Howie Roseman and Nick Sirianni have been reaching out to available NFL coaches and coordinators, as well as coaching agents across the league, to evaluate potential coordinator candidates for 2024. So what the hell does that tell you? Like, these coordinators are not going to be around because they're going to be fired. So it's like, does David Tepper really want to go out and hire an OC that's about to be canned because they underperformed this year? I mean, that probably does have David Tepper written all over it. But.
I mean, they haven't even requested an interview with Brian Johnson, right?
The Panthers?
Yeah.
Yes. So Adam Schefter is the one that tweeted it out, because people were asking about that yesterday. He posted about 5 days ago, and I don't know if the Panthers have put it out yet. Let me see. I don't know if they have.
So while you're looking that up, I'll say the flip of that is they're looking for candidates to fill their position because they know something that's coming down the pipe.
That could be too.
And that would be jarring for me because, again, I don't think that he would be a good hire. I would not be excited for this team going forward. But, of course, I would give him a chance. And
he is not on the Panthers coaching tracker. However, Adam Schefter did tweet it out 5 days ago. I retweeted it on their profile yesterday. So it is out there. And I'm wondering if they're not reporting it because they don't want it out there. I don't know. But Rossini also added to all this that she quote tweeted her tweet and said, though this may suggest that Sirianni is safe, I'm told he has not met with the owner, something that was not possible today because of logistic issues. So he might not be, Sirianni might not be clear yet. So who knows? I just think it's interesting. We have the Kaplan stuff coming out and then this coming out and how they perform this week. It's a whole thing. I'm not opposed to Hallaby. I think he has some intrigue there. I know there's some other things that he had between him and Doug Peterson, but he has a little bit of intrigue for me at least, just based off of some of the things I've seen and watched videos on. But something just to monitor, because I feel like this is really the only other candidate that has been reported that the Panthers are like actual interested in, and we'll see what happens. There was another report out there, and I'm trying to think. I think it was a GM candidate. Oh, Champ Kelly. I think it's worth noting that. I know it sounds like I've seen a report today out there that more and more likelihood maybe he's going to stick around in Las Vegas because he was in on head coach interviews. But I think it was a Raiders reporter had tweeted out yesterday, because the Panthers, I think, interviewed him. It was either yesterday or Monday, but his interview went long with Carolina. So just something to monitor, keep on the radar. He's another guy that Carolina could be interested as we move forward here. But I think if you don't have anything else to add, I think we'll leave it at that. We just appreciate everyone for tuning in to the Panthers on Tap podcast. We'll monitor all these coaching things. I think things are going to ramp up as we get to next week, because next week, January 22nd, is when coaches can interview in person. So that, I think by the end of next week or early the week after, I think we probably will have an idea, or the head coach will be named at that point. I think things will really progress here quickly. So just monitor that. Go give us a follow on Twitter at Panthers on Tap for all your analysis and breaking news. And as always,